About 6 months ago, my son Dominic came to me and he said, "Dad, we had like a track and field competition at our school during PE." And he said, I ran the 800 meters and I also did shot put. Now, that's my buzzword, okay? I'll tell you that in a minute. He said, we did shot put. And he said, "Dad, whoever got in the top 3 for these events, they get to go to a city-wide, finals against all the other elementaries." Well, Dominic was in the 4th grade at this time, and he tells me, he's like, "Dad, I made it in the top 3 for shot put." And I am like, because here's a little-known fact about your pastor, Nick Smith. I threw shot put and discus in high school. I know what you're thinking. You look at me and you're like, you don't look like those normal burly dudes that do that. Well, what I lacked in strength, I made up for in technique. And so I had fun in high school doing that. So when my son told me, he's like, "Dad, I'm going to the citywide competition," I'm like, I'm going on Amazon. We're ordering a shot put right now. When is this competition? It was like 2 to 3 weeks. And he's like, "Okay, when it comes, then we're going to practice and we're going to get ready. We're going to do everything that we can." Now, from my shot put experience, there are 3 main types of throwing. There's a standstill, which is basically your front foot is planted, and you just kind of throw that way. Then you've got a glide technique, and then you've got to spin a 360. And I thought, wow, 360, that's too much to learn in such a short time. I'm like, okay, we're either going to do the standstill or we're going to do the glide technique. So I'm like all pumped up, ready to show them. We had to go out to a field because if you don't know what a shot put is, it is like a 6-pound ball, and you can't just throw that in your yard because you'll like break your yard up. So we had to find a field in kind of middle of nowhere, and we just make our own little shot put area. I get out there and start training him. All right, these are the techniques. These are how you should hold it. This is how your arm should be. This is how your other arm should be. You got to activate your legs. You got to twist. You got to do this, and you got to yell. Everyone say yell. That's an important word. We'll come back to that. So I'm showing him how to do this, and at first, like he's having fun with it. But then we kind of get to the part where have you ever like coached your own child before, and you kind of hit that spot where it's like, they don't want to listen anymore. They're not having fun anymore, and you're not having fun anymore. And we had kind of reached that point, and I kind of had this revelation. I was trying to teach my son how to throw shot put the way that I learned when I was a teenager in high school. Well, at that point, I was 6'1", and I had a different set of abilities than a 4th grader. And so I had this kind of revelation, and I'm like, I am making this too complicated. I am taking the joy out of this event for him. So I just say, "Dominic, just take kind of what I've said and do you. Like, you try to do it." And so he starts to kind of just incorporate a little bit, but he makes it his own, and he starts to throw pretty well. Well, the city finals come up, and we get there, and all the schools are represented, and each student is going to get 3 attempts. Well, attempt number 1 comes up, and he kind of does, and he does a little throw, and he goes about 21 feet, okay? Now, I've been training him a couple weeks, so I know, like, projection-wise where I was wanting him to be. I was wanting him to be about 25 feet. So I kind of go to him, and I'm like, "Dominic, you're holding back." And I'm like, because you're not yelling. That's the important word. You're not yelling. If you are a shot put or discus person and you've seen them before, like they yell when they throw. Like it pushes air out. It somehow opens your body up or I don't know the science behind it, but it does something. So anyways, he gets up for his next attempt, and I'm like, "Dominic, you got to yell." So he goes, "Ah!" He catches some people's attention around him because they're like, "Whoa," because nobody had yelled whatsoever yet. But he throws it a foot farther. So now he's at 22 feet, and I'm like, this is still not where he should be. Like, you can do better. So I go over to him to the side, and I'm like, "Listen, don't be nervous about the crowd that's here. You are passionate. You need to yell like the way I know you yell, like the way I've heard you yell for the last 2 to 3 weeks." So he kind of gets up there again. He's kind of looking, and he goes, "Ah!" I kid you not, every parent that was there, everyone, oh my goodness. The lady who's like running the whole little shot put area, she actually is a collegiate shot putter. She was like, wow, like that was awesome. He threw 26 feet. He set a personal best, and he did fantastic. But it was because he was being himself. He was doing what he is confident about. You see, when we do the things in life that we're built to do or we're confident to do, like it comes out. Another area, if you ever want to get in a 3-hour-long conversation with my son, just ask one question about a dinosaur, okay? Because he's passionate about it. So he just had this in him. Well, Dominic ended up third in all of the schools in the city, but he was the top fourth grader out of all fourth graders in our whole city where we used to live. So I was super proud of him. Now you may be asking, why am I telling you that story? The reason I'm telling you that story is because when we operate in the right fit, the power of God can flow through us. When we operate in the right fit for who we are, the power of God can flow through us. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most famous stories in the Bible found in 1 Samuel 17. This is the story of David and Goliath. Now, there's a lot of backstory. We're not going to read it all. We don't have time, so I'm going to give you the highlights. We have the Israelites. These are the people of God. We have the Philistines. These are the enemies. What had happened is the Philistines and Israelites, they're kind of at a standoff. Nobody wants to do anything. They're not engaging with each other. So one day, a Philistine giant by the name of Goliath, who's said to be like 9 feet tall, he comes out and he starts taunting the Israelites and saying, "Isn't there anybody among you who would want to come fight me?" Well, in ancient warfare, there was kind of this rule that if a champion would present himself from each side, it would spare the bloodshed of the whole army. And whoever won, then the loser's army basically became slaves to the winner's army. So Goliath, he is making this challenge on a daily basis, but nobody is stepping up. This young man by the name of David comes along. He's actually there to visit his brothers. He's bringing them food, and he sees this Goliath making this taunt. And he goes and is like, "Hey, I'll fight this guy." And everybody's kind of looking at him like, "Who are you? Like, you're a nobody." Well, he ends up being taken over to King Saul. Saul was their champion. He should have been the one going to fight, but he was choosing to not. So somehow, David convinces Saul to let him be the champion representing Israel to go against the Philistines. So we're going to pick up the story now, and this is King Saul. He's trying to prepare David for this war that's about to happen between him and Goliath. 1 Samuel 17, verse 38. Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet, and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. My first point to you today is that being authentic means recognizing what doesn't fit you. Being authentic to you means recognizing what doesn't fit you. So Saul tells David, this is what you need to fight. If you're going to go fight this champion, you need to wear my armor. You need to wear champion's armor. This is what I have worn into countless battles, and you should wear this into this battle. Well, the first piece of armor is this helmet. Now, if you've ever seen a kid put on a helmet that's too big for them, it kind of slides all over the place. It slides, blocks their vision. It's just really clunky. It's all over. It's just ridiculous looking. So I imagine that David with this helmet on is kind of this is too big for him. It's kind of sliding around, can't really see. Then we get to the coat of mail. Well, the coat of mail is kind of looks like chain link fence all smashed together, but put upon his clothing. He's wearing this clothing and puts this coat of mail on. But the coat of mail was designed for King Saul's body, not for David. So it wasn't the right fit. But King Saul said, no, here, I want you to have this coat of mail. It would have been amazing. It would have been the best that the land could have presented because it was the king's armor. So he puts this on him, but he's like, can't really move around in it. It would be comical to like watch this guy wear this thing. It wouldn't be the right size. Then we get to the sword. Well, the sword would be the most beautiful sword in all the land. It would be super sharp. It would be powerful. It would have been the same sword that King Saul used himself in many battles and killed many people with. So David, he's like trying to utilize this, trying to move it around, but it's not designed for him because King Saul was much larger than David was. So David's trying to do this, and it's just not working. So David responds, I can't go in these, he protested to Saul. I'm not used to them. So David took them off again. My next point to you is that anointing is on authenticity. Anointing is on authenticity. You see, David was inexperienced and wouldn't have had a lot of training in hand-to-hand combat. You see, David hadn't been like a frontline warrior. My question to you today is, are you trying to be something you're not? Are you trying to be something you're not in life? Are you trying to mimic something or someone maybe that you look up to or maybe that you love and so, hey, I want to be like this person? When I was first becoming a preacher, like every preacher has their own style of how they preach and it's unique to them. Well, when I was young, there was only a few preachers that were like really on television, and this was before everybody had online services and YouTube clips of all these sermons and whatnot. There was only a couple of preachers who were on TV. And so I'm like, well, this is kind of what I have to like base my preaching style off of. Well, a preacher that I love just kind of listening to and watching because he just captivated the audience. He just had this way about him. He had this deep kind of booming voice. And like when you heard this guy, and I got like this little squeaky voice, but when you heard this guy, like you felt like God was talking. Well, this guy was the name T.D. Jakes, if you know who T.D. Jakes is. And T.D. Jakes would just preach up a storm. Preach up a storm. He was a bald head. He had like kind of a sweat rag. He would do this thing because he'd be getting sweating, and he just was passionate and purposeful in every word he said. He kind of had this way that he would walk around the room, and he would preach the power of God. And when I first became a preacher, like, who am I trying to be like? T.D. Jakes. I am not T.D. Jakes. I am not. Actually, side note, several months ago, I had a family who asked me to do a memorial service for them, and they asked me to preach like T.D. Jakes. And I'm like, there's a problem there. I'm not him, and I'm not going to be able to do that. But I tell you what, I'll be the best Nick Smith that I can be, okay? Anyways, I tell you that because sometimes we are trying to mimic and be something that we just are not. Now, I get it. You may look up to somebody, so maybe there's something like, hey, I like what they do. I like what that person does, and you try to make your own style of what you're doing. Let me give you another illustration. Any of you competitive in the room? Raise your hand if you're competitive. First one gets a prize. Just kidding. Oh, Jessica, did you raise your hand? You did. Okay. I called her out last service. She didn't raise her hand. My wife is ultra competitive. If you have never played a game night with Jessica, you will see a whole nother side to her. And it is fun, but she's all about it. It's like me trying to tell a competitive person, don't be competitive. Well, that doesn't like compute with them. They only know how to play one way, to win, right? In fact, when we first started dating, when we played some like card games and whatnot, she was like, I just need to let you know that there's one rule. I win. I'm like, oh. Okay. Being somebody else or trying to be like somebody else is exhausting. Have you ever tried to be somebody who you're not, and it's exhausting? Like introverts trying to be like an extrovert, that's exhausting, right? An introvert, if you're an introvert, raise your hand. You might like raise it like this because you don't want to be seen. Introverts, like you go to a party and you're the person that's kind of in the corner, Maybe you like go to the food table, you grab some food so it looks like you're doing something, and then like when your food runs out, you get some more food, or you get like the lemonade or whatever, and you feel like if I am just over here, I am okay. I do not have to engage with the crowd of people, and like that's just kind of who you are. Extroverts are like going in, high-fiving, hugging everybody. Like they'll talk to the wall if the wall will listen. They'll make a best friend with the wall. Like extroverts, like they feed off of the energy of other people, and that fuels them up. Well, introverts, people exhaust them. So, just so you know, as a pastor, my personality, I fall right in the middle between introvert and extrovert. So I can be extroverted when the moment calls for it, but I lean more introvert. So like at the end of the day today, like I'm going to go home and I'm going to be exhausted because we were all together. And that's just my introvert side. For some of you, it's like you saw your family this week. Like you're ready to go. Like you got your second win for the day. For me, I'm like, I got to take a nap. Being somebody else is counterfeit. Being somebody else is counterfeit. Being you brings confidence. Being you brings confidence. David says to Saul, King Saul, I can't wear these because I've never tested them. I've never practiced in them. They do not fit me. People can tell when you're not being yourself. People can tell when you're not being you. Several years ago, I was training an intern who was preaching in youth ministry with me, and I was training them like, okay, hey, you're going to do a sermon just for me. We're going to be in a room like this. I'll sit in the back, and I'll just kind of observe, and then I'll kind of give you some input at the very end. So he did the sermon, did the message, and here's what happened. He was not being himself. He was trying to be me, and he is not me. His makeup is completely different than me. So I told him, like, listen, you have something that I don't. You are naturally funny. Like, utilize that. Lean into that. And when you utilize that, that's going to open people up to you. So the night comes when he's preaching in front of the youth, and he utilizes his humor, and it just opens up all the youth's heart. They're able to hear what he's saying, what he's preaching, the word of God. It comes at them. Because there's power when you operate the way God designed you. There's power when you operate the way God designed you. Verse 40, so David picks up 5 smooth stones from a stream and puts them into his shepherd bag. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Now, let's just agree on something. If David would have worn Saul's armor, he most likely would have died. Because he was not used to them, he probably would have tripped before he even got to Saul, or even got to Goliath, and he would have been killed. And that was it. The war would have been over. You see, David recognized he can't do this. He had to do something different. If he wore that armor, he would be walking funny. He wouldn't be able to swing the way that he needs to do. He needed to be who God made him to be. My question to you is, are you trying to fight battles in life in an inauthentic way? Are you trying to fight battles in life in an inauthentic way? Are you pretending to be somebody else? Are you not utilizing your natural giftings? David's going to go on to win this battle because he was confident. He did not back away from his natural gifting. My next point is that confidence comes with authenticity. Confidence comes with authenticity. That means you're being who God designed you to be. And when you are who God designed you to be, you kind of hold yourself a little different. You kind of have a little bit more self-esteem. You're ready, you're willing, you're able to do what God has called you to be. David took off this armor and he went to what he knew. You see, he was not like, hey, swinging swords around all day. David had been a shepherd. So he went to something that he knew. He went to something that he had practiced over and over with. David knew that he couldn't fight Goliath in hand-to-hand combat. The Bible tells us Goliath was like 9 feet tall. Well, David, like, average height would have been like 5'6" at that time. He would have been small going against this giant. There was no way he was going to win against Goliath in his own game. So David chooses to go against a giant with a sling. Now, I didn't say a slingshot. When we think of a slingshot, we think of the kid's toy, we pull back and we, throw a little rock. I'm saying a sling, and I'm going to talk to you in a minute about what that's like. David was confident because he had practiced with this sling over and over and over again. What you may not know is that in ancient warfare, there was actually a part of military that was designated and called the slingers. You're the slingers, okay? These people, their job was to sling rocks at the enemy. You may think, well, that's kind of weird, but you got to understand, a slinger could accurately hit something from 440 yards away. So they didn't have to get up close and personal. They could also launch something at 60 miles an hour. So this kind of changes our picture of this battle between David and Goliath. If David faces Goliath on brute strength and physicality, he loses. But he chooses to face Goliath on the giftings and the abilities that God has given him. Now, utilizing a sling, this is what it would have been like. It would not have been like this. This would be like a lasso, like yeehaw, He would have done something like this, like a softball windup. He'd wind up once and it would fly out. That's how he was going to go against Goliath. My point to you is, don't try and fight the enemy on the enemy's terms. Don't try to engage the enemy on the enemy's terms. Fight the enemy with the authority of God in you. How has God designed you? What unique giftings and abilities and resources has God given you? What personality traits has God given you? Utilize those things. Don't go against the enemy on the enemy's own game plan. Use what God has given you. My next point is that victory is in the authenticity. Victory is in the authenticity. In 1 Samuel 17, verse 48, as Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. He reached into his shepherd bag, and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling, and it hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. David wins this fight because he was himself. He embraced who God had made him to be. You will not be fulfilled in life unless you embrace who God has created you to be. Now let's get a little practical. I'm going to get up in your business now, okay? Parents, sometimes this happens with our kids. We feel like our kids should be little copies of who we are. And whatever our giftings are, we think that they should be able to do those same things. So maybe you're a whiz in math. Well, your kids have to be a whiz in math. Or maybe you were a tremendous athlete. Well, you feel like your kids have to be a tremendous athlete. But what happens is that's not how it always works. God gifts and gives things differently. So you may have a child who is completely creative, and you are not creative at all. And you're like, I was an athlete. I don't know how to really do this. But instead of complaining about it, instead of trying to force them to be you, help them to embrace who they are. Help them to embrace the giftings that God has given them. You may have been a straight A student in school, and your kid may be somebody who's C and B, that's it for them. Here's something that my parents told me growing up, and I think this is a great word of advice. Encourage your kids to be the best that they can be. My parents never told me, hey, you've got to get this grade. What they did say is, if you can tell me you tried your hardest, that's all that matters to me. So if you tried your hardest in your class or on the test or on the sports field or whatever it may be, that's all that matters. We need to encourage kids to develop and be the best version God created them to be. Parents, we also need to realize that when you have multiple children, you may have a child whose ability is completely other than the other kids that you have. For any football fans in the house, there is an NFL quarterback by the name of Trevor Lawrence. He is 6'6". He's huge. He is like super buff. He was a national champion in college, and he plays for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Anyways, I read this ESPN article about him, and what fascinated me about it was that the article wasn't about him, it was about his brother, his older brother. His older brother is not 6'6". His older brother is not athletic whatsoever. In fact, there's the story in there was saying when he was young and he was playing like Little League baseball, like he was the kid that was like digging in the dirt or like watching the butterflies go by or like, the picking up the daisies off the ground. Like that was who he was. His parents kind of realized this and they thought, okay, this kid isn't interested in athletics. Let's find something that interests him. What he was interested in was art. So this kid has an NFL younger brother as a quarterback who's 6'6". This guy's like 5 nothing, but he's an artist. And he has great gifting in that area. Sometimes as parents, the best thing that we can realize is that our kids are going to be different. And that we need to help them and equip them to be who God has created them to be. They're not going to each be the same. We need to also recognize that our children receive feedback or criticism in different ways. We also need to recognize that each child can receive discipline in different ways. Sometimes we want to try to force everybody to be the same, and that just isn't the best thing that we can do. As we wrap up, we want to recognize what doesn't fit. We want to know that anointing is on authenticity. Our confidence comes with authenticity, and we have victory when we are authentic. Do any of you have a newer phone that has like facial recognition on it? It's a cool feature, right? You can hold it up and like as it sees your face, it kind of processes like all your points, that of interest on your face, and it opens up your phone. Well, my wife has this feature on her phone. If I pick up her phone and I hold it to my face, you know what it does? It says, "You're ugly." No, what it says is locked. I cannot unlock her phone from my face because my face isn't the same pattern as her face. She is uniquely her, and it has been identified only to her face, not to my face. Inside of the phone, there's all these wonderful apps and games and useful things, email and whatnot, and social media, all these things in there that are only available to her because she has what unlocks it. If I am inauthentic and I try to go and use my face to open it up, it will not do it. I have to manually punch in the code and override. It's the same thing with God. You see, God has uniquely gifted and created each and every one of you. When you look at God and He looks at you, it unlocks something powerful. Unlocks all those cool features that only you have. Stop trying to be somebody else. Embrace who God has called you to be in life. Utilize your intellect, or utilize your creativity, or utilize your athleticism, or utilize your business mind, or utilize whatever it may be. Utilize what God has created you to be, and you will find purpose. You will be fulfilled because you're being authentic to who God has created you to be. Be the best you. Whether that's as a friend, whether that's as a student, whether that's as a teacher or a boss or an employee, a husband, a wife, a mom, a dad, be the best you that God has created you to be.